More now on the top story, the House passing its version of tax reform and the first step towards an historic overhaul. Joining us now from Washington is MacGuineas, the president of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, and she has advised members of Congress for many years on health, economic, tax, and budget policy. Maya, always good to see you. So what a day in Washington. You can't be happy with this bill.
No, I cannot, because what I've been advising for all those years is we have to keep our eye on the fiscal health of the country. And the fiscal health of the country is not good right now. In this country, we have debt relative to the economy, highest it's ever been since we came out of World War II. And meanwhile, tax reform, which only comes along every few decades, is one of the most important drivers of growth that we could put in place if we do it right. But this bill has so many potentially fatal flaws in terms of the effect on the national debt that could ultimately undermine economic growth. So I'm very concerned that not only are we wasting a real opportunity, but we're going to end up doing damage to the long-term economy if we end up piling on the debt.
In this bill, what do you think is going to inflict the biggest damage in this bill?
So two things. The first, that this bill allows itself to borrow, allows $1.5 trillion to be borrowed in order to comply with tax reform. So tax reform, of course, is shifting how we tax. That's really important for growth. Tax cuts are lower tax burdens. They make a whole lot of sense if you're fiscal, if you don't have huge deficits, if you don't have a huge debt, if you're cutting spending. None of those apply. So I wish we were not borrowing $1.5 trillion. That is a terrible decision to make at this time when we should be bringing the debt down, not up. But on top of that, there is about, by our calculations, $500 billion worth of gimmicks in this tax bill. And that's the second thing I'm upset about, which is those gimmicks tend to be things that will expire. What policymakers are assuming they'll expire to make the cost of the tax bill look less, but they don't really want them to. But having these expiring tax breaks throughout your tax bill, of course, undermine the whole purpose of creating certainty, knowing what we can expect, permanency. So on one hand, people are saying, oh, it won't cost more than $1.5 trillion, already too much. And on the other hand, they're saying, oh, don't worry, we'll really extend these, wink, wink. That will add another $500 billion to the bill. So it's really a bait and switch right there.
Maya, it's Paul Allen here in Sydney. I'm just curious, if the deficit can't be reduced below sort of 10-year projections, isn't there a chance that the threshold for getting this passed in the Senate gets a lot tougher? Is that correct?
So in order for this bill to pass the Senate, it is going to be more challenging than what we just saw in the House, because there are a lot of people who are concerned about the bill. But that's right. If they don't do it in a way that is something called BIRD compliant, if they do it in a way that would add to the deficit in the second 10 years, suddenly the threshold goes from needing 50 votes, 51 votes to 60 votes. And so it becomes more difficult. That is why so many parts of the tax bill magically expire after 8 years. And they pretend those costs won't be there to make them look like they won't increase the deficit. But of course, the plan is to extend them, and then they would. So that's the purpose of going through kind of all these accounting gymnastics to try to get it done with a lower threshold.
Mayor, one of the most vocal critics of this has been the National Association of Realtors. Are their doomsday warnings about house values accurate?
No, let me put myself on the other side of the National Association of Realtors. I actually think the things that we're doing in the bill, they're not necessarily popular, but some of these base broadeners, and they include reducing the home mortgage interest deduction, reducing the state and local tax deduction, getting rid of a lot of tax breaks that already exist in the tax code. I think those are some of the best things in the bill. I should say I think the very best things in the bill are updating, modernizing our corporate tax code, which is horribly out of date, both globally and with our domestic economic system. So there's much improvement to do there. But at the same time, I think base broadening is a real opportunity to simplify the tax code, get rid of a bunch of loopholes that are really perverse subsidies in many ways, and use that money to bring down rates. But this is where the lobbying efforts in Washington come in like crazy. Every one of those tax loopholes has a huge constituency, well-funded lobbyists, and people who love them. I love my home mortgage interest deduction. Of course, I like to have it, but we would have better tax policy if we reduced it. And no, it will not kill the housing market.
Maya, I want to play for you a comment from Steny Hoyer, the Democratic, the minority whip. And I want to just play for you his reaction to the House passing this bill.
This House bill in the Senate Finance Committee lost 26-0. Not a single Republican senator voted for the House bill. So they may have had a victory today, but that was a Pyrrhic victory, and in my opinion, a loss for the American people.
And you know what's interesting is that, the Democrats are usually the ones at fault for increasing the debt, not the Republicans. And it seems like they've almost kind of not necessarily switched roles, but you sort of wonder, right, Maya, where are these debt slashing Republicans on the Hill? Yeah,
a couple great points there, because where did all those members of Congress who ran on balancing the budget, cutting spending, reforming entitlements, getting the debt under control, where did they go when they're just voting right now to add, again, realistically, over $2 trillion to the debt? That is an eye-popping number. And the sad truth here is that fiscal responsibility, it's hard. It means making a lot of difficult policy choices. And so whoever is in the majority tends to forget their fiscal responsibility stripes. The minority party, the Democrats in this case, become more vocal as a way to stop the other party from enacting their agenda.
Right.
But what we really need is a bigger commitment to it. But you bring up this great point about the debt ceiling. So all of these Republicans that are voting for this bill now are going to have to decide, and they have to decide yes, to lift the debt ceiling in a very short amount of time.
Right.
And their concerns about the huge record national debt, which is real, are going to ring very hollow after they've just cast votes to increase it.
Absolutely. Certainly, there's a lot of ironies here going on in Washington. But just very quickly, though, on the corporate tax rate, whether it's cut in 2018 or cut beginning in 2019, isn't it going to have a benefit, though, to the economy and to U.S. business?
Absolutely. I actually think that the concerns about delaying the corporate tax rate cut for a year are completely misplaced, particularly because expensing would already be in place. The improvements to the tax code internationally, in terms of expensing, which does have a huge problem because it runs out after 5 years, we should make that permanent. And the rate reductions are going to be very beneficial for the corporate sector. And that, of course, will spread throughout the economy. The question is distributionally how much. But it certainly is going to affect growth, not as much as some of the magical growth numbers that are being pulled out there, but they're the most growth-enhancing parts of the bill. And so I think it's really important that we are taking those actions. I wouldn't have even thought we needed to get the corporate rate down to 20%. I would have declared 25, 26 a huge victory. And that one-year delay that some people are worried about, I don't think is a problem at all. In many ways, it's good policy. It does try to mask the cost of the bill. But I think the corporate side has it about right, with one exception. They should have been broadening the corporate tax base even more.